The morning my brother stood up in front of the entire boardroom and called me a charity case, he was smiling. Not a nervous smile. Not an apologetic one. The kind of smile that tells you someone has been waiting a very long time to say exactly that. I remember the way the fluorescent lights caught the gold of his watch as he gestured toward me. "She has no business being in this room," he said. "She never did." I didn't say a word. I just picked up my coffee cup, took a slow sip, and looked out the window at the Chicago skyline. 22 floors below, people were rushing to work, living their ordinary lives, completely unaware that inside this glass tower, a woman was being humiliated by the family she had spent a decade trying to love. What my brother didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I owned the building we were standing in. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old, and for most of my adult life, I was the invisible one. My father remarried when I was 9, and from the moment his new wife walked through our front door with her 2 children, my stepbrother Daniel and stepsister Renee, I understood what it meant to be made to feel like a guest in your own home. Not cruelly at first. It was more subtle than that. The kind of subtle that leaves no bruises but carves itself into you over years. My father was a good man in the ways that were easy. He remembered birthdays, he showed up to school plays, but when his new wife looked at me with that particular expression, patient, tolerant, just slightly inconvenienced, he looked away. Every time. And I learned early that in that house, I was someone to be managed, not loved. I left for college on a partial scholarship and 2 part-time jobs. My father handed me a card with $200 in it at the airport and said he was proud of me. His wife stood beside him with her arms crossed, already talking about Renee's upcoming dance recital before I had even turned toward security. I didn't cry on the plane. I made a list. Not a list of grievances, a list of everything I was going to build. I studied finance and economics. I worked nights at a hotel front desk and weekends at a catering company. I graduated with honors, took an entry-level analyst position at a mid-size investment firm in Chicago, and spent the next 6 years doing what I was best at, seeing patterns that other people missed. Numbers had always made sense to me in a way that people sometimes didn't. A balance sheet never looked at me the way his wife did. A profit margin never made me feel like an inconvenience. By 28, I had been promoted 3 times. By 29, I was quietly managing a private fund with assets that would have made my father's jaw drop, though he never knew because I never told him. There was no cruelty in my silence. I simply understood that some things grow better in the dark. I drove a 7-year-old Honda Civic. I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in Pilsen with secondhand furniture and a view of a parking lot. I wore clearance rack blazers and bought my coffee at the gas station down the street. I did this deliberately. Not out of deprivation, but out of strategy. The best position to hold, I had learned, was one that nobody was looking at. My one indulgence was a small silver clover pin I wore on my lapel. I'd found it at an antique market my first year in Chicago. Slightly tarnished, small enough that most people never noticed it. I wore it every day. A reminder to myself that luck is mostly preparation in disguise. The call from my father came on a Tuesday in March. He sounded tired in the way that people sound when they've been pretending everything is fine for too long, and the pretending has finally worn through. He said he wanted to see me, said there were some things the family needed to discuss, used the word family the way people use it when they mean something specific by it, when they mean you owe us something. I drove to the house I grew up in on a Saturday morning. My stepmother opened the door and looked me over the way she always had. That same inventory scan, checking for signs that I had become either more or less than she expected. "You look tired," she said. "I'm well," I said. "Thank you for having me." The kitchen smelled like the coffee she always made too strong. Daniel was already there, sitting at the head of the table, my father's chair, scrolling through his phone. He was 34, broad-shouldered, recently divorced, and had the particular confidence of a man who had never once been told he was taking up too much space. He glanced up at me. "Claire." Not a greeting. A notation. Renee came in from the back hallway carrying a folder. She was 2 years older than me, always immaculately dressed, always performing. She set the folder on the table and looked at me with an expression she probably thought was sympathetic. My father sat at the kitchen counter, not at the table. That detail stuck with me. He was in his own home and he was sitting at the counter, while his stepson sat in his chair. Some arrangements settle into families so gradually that the people inside them stop seeing them entirely. He looked older than the last time I had seen him, which had been 14 months ago at Christmas. He had the look of a man carrying something heavy. "Claire," he said. "Thanks for coming." "Of course." Daniel put his phone down. "Let's not drag this out. Dad's business is underwater. Has been for 2 years. The building on Carver Street needs to either be sold or refinanced, and there are some debts that need to be consolidated." My father's business was a small commercial property management company he had built over 30 years. 3 buildings in the south suburbs, modest but stable. Or it had been stable, until Daniel had talked my father into bringing him in as a partner 4 years ago. I knew this because I had been watching, quietly, from a distance. I kept track of the things that mattered to my father, even when he didn't keep track of me. "How much?" I said. Daniel looked surprised that I had cut straight to it. "The consolidation would require about 80,000. Short-term bridge loan, basically. We've already talked to 2 lenders and the rates are not great. And you're asking me." His jaw tightened slightly. "We're asking the family." There it was. Family. I looked at my father. He was looking at his coffee cup. "I'd need to see the full financials," I said. "All 3 properties, the loan structures, the operating costs." Daniel's expression shifted into the one I remembered from childhood. The look he wore when I had said something that irritated him by being correct. "This isn't an audit, Claire." "No," I said. "But if you're asking me to contribute $80,000 to a situation I haven't been briefed on, then yes, it is." My stepmother said my name in that particular tone, the one designed to make me feel I was being difficult. I looked at her calmly and said nothing. My father finally looked up. "I can get you the files," he said quietly. He got me the files. I sat in my car in their driveway for 40 minutes going through them on my laptop. What I found was not entirely surprising, but it was worse than I had anticipated. Daniel had taken out 2 separate lines of credit against the Carver Street property without full disclosure to my father. He had redirected revenue from one of the other buildings through a management LLC he had set up separately. One my father had signed off on, without understanding what he was signing. The 80,000 wasn't a bridge loan need. It was a gap created almost entirely by mismanagement and, in certain line items, something that looked very close to fraud. I sat there for a moment, watching a neighbor's dog investigate their front lawn. Then I made 3 phone calls. The first was to my attorney. The second was to an acquisitions contact I had worked with twice before. The third was to a property holding entity. One that existed quietly, under a name that meant nothing to anyone who didn't know exactly where to look. That entity was mine. I went back inside. I told them I would think about it. Over the next 6 weeks, I said very little and moved very carefully. The Carver Street building had been quietly listed by a creditor after Daniel's second line of credit went into technical default. It went to a private sale. A holding company acquired it at a fair market price. That holding company was a subsidiary of a fund I had structured 2 years earlier. I now owned the building my father's company depended on. I did not tell anyone. I went back to my apartment, changed the water filter in my refrigerator, and cooked pasta for dinner. Daniel found out about the sale 3 weeks later. He called me furious to tell me that some faceless investor group had scooped the property and that the family was now in an impossible position regarding the lease terms. "That's a difficult situation," I said. "You could have helped us," he said. "You could have given us the 80,000 and this never would have happened." "I could have," I said. "Yes." He hung up. What happened next took another 4 months to fully unfold. But I'll compress it because the details are less important than the shape of it. Daniel, in trying to restructure the lease with the new owner, me, though he didn't know that yet, made a series of increasingly aggressive legal moves. He filed a complaint claiming the sale had been conducted improperly. He hired an attorney. He pushed for a mediation hearing, and when that didn't go his way, he escalated to a formal legal proceeding. He was trying to intimidate a faceless holding company. He had no idea he was trying to intimidate me. The morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully. Not in my clearance rack blazer. I wore a charcoal gray suit I'd had made the previous year for exactly this kind of occasion. Structured, precise. The kind of suit that walks into a room before you do. I pinned the small silver clover to my lapel. I drove to the building downtown where the hearing was being held, parked in a spot I had reserved, and rode the elevator to the 14th floor. Daniel was already in the conference room with his attorney and my stepmother when I walked in. He looked at me with genuine confusion for a moment, the way people look when something is in a context where it doesn't belong. "What are you doing here?" he said. I set my briefcase on the table and sat down across from him. "I'm the representative for Clover Holdings LLC, I said, the entity that owns the Carver Street property. There was a silence in the room that had a particular texture to it. His attorney, a man in his 50s with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, looked from me to his file and back again. His face went through several expressions in rapid succession. "You," Daniel said. It wasn't a question. "Me," I said. My stepmother made a sound I had never heard from her before. Something between a word and an exhale. I had brought my own attorney, a woman named Patricia who had the quiet, devastating competence of someone who has won so many times she no longer needs to perform it. She set a series of documents on the table with the unhurried efficiency of someone who already knows the outcome. Daniel's attorney asked for a recess. Patricia said that was fine. We had the room until 4. In the hallway, I could hear Daniel and his attorney speaking in low, urgent voices. My stepmother's heels on the tile floor pacing. I poured myself a glass of water and looked out the window. When they came back in, Daniel sat down across from me and for the first time in my life, he looked at me like I was something he hadn't accounted for. I want to be honest about that moment. There was no triumph in it, not exactly. It was more like a long, slow exhale after holding your breath for 22 years. "You set this up," he said. "You let us dig ourselves in and you just—" "I acquired a property that was in default," I said. "That's all I did. You knew. You knew the whole time." "I knew more than you gave me credit for. I always did." He looked at my lapel. At the small silver pin. "What is that?" "A clover," I said. "I've worn it for years. You never noticed." His attorney put a hand on his arm and said something quietly. Daniel pulled back. The hearing proceeded. Patricia walked through the documentation, the original sale, the default triggers, the acquisition timeline. Daniel's complaint had no legal standing. He had filed it based on a misunderstanding of the entity structure, assuming the holding company was a distant institutional investor who could be pressured. When it became clear that the owner was someone sitting 3 feet away from him, and that she had documentation for every single step of the process, the complaint collapsed inside an hour. What came out in the process, what Patricia surfaced methodically, document by document, was the fuller picture of what Daniel had done to my father's business. The diverted revenue. The undisclosed credit lines. The LLC he had structured to benefit himself at the expense of the company my father had spent 30 years building. My father was not in that room. I had asked him not to come. But his attorney was there and she was listening to everything. Outside the conference room afterward, my stepmother found me in the hallway. She looked diminished in a way I hadn't expected. Smaller, somehow, than the woman who had stood in doorways of my childhood and made me feel like an afterthought. "I didn't know," she said, "about what Daniel did to the business. I want you to know I didn't know." I looked at her for a moment. "I believe you," I said. "I don't think you're dishonest. I think you were just selective about what you paid attention to." She didn't respond to that. But she didn't look away either. "Your father," she started. "I'm going to take care of the business," I said. "The Carver Street property will be held at current lease terms. I'm not here to dismantle what he built. I never was." She looked at the clover pin on my lapel. "He used to call you his lucky one," she said quietly. "When you were small." "Before." She stopped. "He used to say it." I had not known that. The information arrived somewhere in my chest and took a moment to settle. "Tell him to call me," I said. "When he's ready." I picked up my briefcase and walked toward the elevator. In the weeks that followed, Daniel faced a separate proceeding. Not one I initiated, but one my father's attorney filed based on what had surfaced in the hearing. The outcome of that is still working through the system as of now. What I can tell you is that my father's business is intact. The 3 properties are being managed properly again. My father and I have spoken on the phone 4 times in the last 2 months, which is more than the previous 4 years combined. He asked me about the Clover pin during our second call. I told him where I found it, that antique market in Pilsen, my first year in the city. $3 and a tarnished clasp. He was quiet for a moment. You always could find the valuable thing in the pile, he said. I didn't say anything for a second. I learned it somewhere, I said. The story I want to leave you with is not about the property, or the hearing, or the look on my brother's face when he understood what had happened. Those things are real, and I won't pretend they didn't matter, but the part that stays with me, the part I keep returning to, is simpler than any of that. It's the moment I sat in my car in my father's driveway with his financial files open on my laptop, and I made a choice. Not the choice about the property, the choice about who I was going to be when all of this was over. I decided I was going to be someone who built something rather than someone who burned something down. Those aren't the same thing, even when the outcome looks similar from the outside. I still drive the same Honda Civic, still live in Pilsen, still buy gas station coffee on the way to the office. But on the passenger seat right now, there's a card my father sent me last week. Just a plain card, the kind you find in a drugstore. Inside it, in his handwriting, are 6 words. I'm sorry. I see you now. I keep it there because some things deserve to ride with you.